And you all will find, as we talk through the content of today's event, there will be some times where I will ask you to give me feedback in the chat, let me know about what you've experienced or which of these techniques that I'll suggest either you've already tried or which ones you'd like to try. So you see at the bottom of the screen, should show up at the bottom of the screen for most people, that there's the chat box there, so that then whenever I ask for your input, it's really helpful for me to see those responses from you in the chat. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started, and that folks can join when they're able to, and the call is being recorded. So if there's any part of it that you have to miss, or if after the call you think of, oh wow, I really wish my friend had attended this, then we'll be able to share that link afterward. So welcome, welcome. This event is Cool, Calm, and Laser Focused Tame GMAT Test Anxiety. I'm Jennifer. I've been coaching on Leland for a little bit more than a year, but I've been coaching GMAT candidates worldwide for 12 years now. So here is our plan. Here's what we're going to be up to covering today. So we'll be talking about understanding the roots. So we'll be thinking about brain science and how it relates to experiencing test anxiety. We'll also be talking about what I like to call your saboteurs. So some of these voices or thoughts that we hear that are coming from good intentions, but that can actually get in our way. We'll find that personifying them is a good way to help diffuse them and help hear from them less and less. I'll give you some success strategies that you can try out during your prep, during the exam itself, and even some things that you can try out after the exam to think about how you want to move forward. And then we plan for having about 10 minutes at the end for question and answer time. So with that, let's keep going. So I'm Jennifer. I've been working with GMAT candidates worldwide for 12 years. So some of you may have recognized me from some GMAT Club events. I am a verbal section expert on the GMAT Club and have been for 6 years now. And I've also hosted some GMAT Club events over the past year. I also work closely with GMAC, the makers of the exam. And I've been able to attend insider meetings with the developers of the exam. This was really helpful the past few years as the GMAT Focus was coming online. So twice last year, we were able to meet with the psychometricians who helped develop the new Focus exam. So I feel like I have a very solid understanding of exactly how this exam is working, how the psychometrics are working, how the adaptive model is working. And that helps me coach candidates even better. And so I'm also happy during the question and answer to answer any questions that you have about that. But I feel quite solid in having that relationship. And I also enjoy coaching for the GMAT because the test makers are quite open with the test prep community, because they realize that in many cases, we are you guys' source of information and they want us to be well informed. And so I really appreciate that. GMAT coaching is what I've done for quite a long time, ever since I've lived in Europe, all these 12 years. I was 3 years in Paris, and now I've been in Berlin for almost 9 years. But many moons ago, back when I was working in the business world more specifically, I started my career with the Walt Disney Company. And so I'd like to think that I still have a little bit of magic here and there. I worked in the development of new entertainment and productions, and I also worked in training and development. So I've always had a soft spot for training and helping people achieve their goals and develop the skills that they wanted to have to make the impact that they wanted to have. I've been very lucky to work with ambitious candidates from all over the world. You can see a quote on the screen from one of my recent students who's about to be starting at INSEAD in France very soon. So to think about my approach to GMAT prep and where this is coming from, my interest in managing test anxiety, as I've been working with candidates for the past 12 years, I've realized that we really need to work on 3 specific major areas in order to feel well prepared and to reach your potential on the GMAT. Many candidates focus on this first area of content knowledge, which is extremely important. We're not going to do well on the GMAT without mastering the content knowledge. On the GMAT, we also need to do well with exam-specific skills and strategies. So you may know, for example, the algebra content, or you may be excellent with reading comprehension, but you need to know how to handle some of the specific types of questions that the GMAT is going to throw at you. This is an important part of your prep as well. But in my first few years of coaching candidates for the GMAT, people that I knew were doing really well with the content knowledge, and that we had worked specifically on the skills and strategies that they would need to address the questions that they would be confronted with on the GMAT. Some of these candidates I still saw were underperforming. They were failing to achieve their potential, or maybe they were getting great scores on practice exams, but not able to achieve those same kind of scores when they sat for the real exam. And so this led me to want to do much more research on what is it that allows someone to succeed when they are facing a high stakes environment. I've read lots of research now on performance psychology, sports psychology in many cases, as well as brain science, to understand what is it that we need to develop in order to be able to show what we know on the GMAT in this fairly unusual situation, but one that matters a lot for us. And so from that point on, I've now incorporated the positive mindset training into all of the GMAT training that I do. For me, positive mindset is about developing your ability to focus, developing your confidence, because GMAT is an exam that can definitely shake our confidence, developing your endurance to maintain that performance throughout the full exam, and also developing your adaptability. When something happens that perhaps you didn't expect, whether it's the timing, whether it's a specific question, being able to adapt in the moment and still gather yourself and move on, and still do well with the rest of the exam. Some of those traits are very helpful as well. So I'm curious, for our group on the call, do you have a GMAT either already scheduled or planned pretty well in your mind? In the chat, can you let me know, do you have an exam scheduled within the next 2 weeks? You can write in A, between 2 weeks and 2 months from now. So we've got one person, two people in that situation of it's coming up in the next 2 weeks, a few people in the situation of between 2 weeks and 2 months from now, and a few people who've got longer. Bushra says, okay, it's in 2 days. Okay, I've got some things that you can try absolutely immediately. So for all of you, this is helpful to see. We've got a range of different timelines. For all of you, we've got some techniques that you can try, but it really is going to take trying the techniques. I can tell you it's not going to be that you watch this event and you just sit and get, and then suddenly you go into the test and you're going to be able to do something different. Whether the exam is in 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, I want to encourage you to very quickly start practicing some of these techniques that we talk about so that you can see which ones work for you, and what you prefer. I also have another question for you. When it comes to experiencing anxiety on the GMAT, how does this affect you? Are there some of you who find that you get questions wrong when you're feeling anxiety and nervousness? Questions wrong that you normally, you would be able to do? Are there some of you who find that you actually consider not applying to programs that would require or put a big emphasis on your GMAT or another exam score? Maybe you doubt your own abilities and potential because of the anxiety that you're feeling about the test? Or do you experience that the days leading up to the exam get overshadowed by dread? Okay, I've seen several A's, a number of C's, and several D's. Okay, so I'm glad, I think we didn't have a B. That's interesting. I'm glad that you're not ruling programs out necessarily that require exams, but I can definitely understand these feelings of doubting whether you really can do it, and experiencing that the days leading up to the exam don't feel as nice as you would like them to, and crucially, that your score is going down. A, that you're getting questions wrong that you would normally be able to do. I definitely don't want you guys to feel like you have to experience all of these in the same way. One thing about my perspective is that we're not here to try to eliminate all of the stress. I'm not like, let's wave a magic wand and suddenly you will be Zen going into the test. Because the truth is, some of the stress that you're feeling is helpful. Some of it is productive. Not all stress is negative. I bet each of you, as you think about some different experiences that you've had in life, you might be able to think about a time when a certain level of stress actually helped you perform better. This idea of a positive level of stress, we could call eustress. And I know this graph looks a little bit like a data insights question, but I promise I'm not going to ask you a question about this graph. It does remind me a little bit of something you might see on DI. On the x-axis along the bottom, you can see the level of pressure increasing, going from low to moderate to high to very high. And on the y-axis, you can see the level of performance increasing. And so you can see on this graph that actually some level of pressure is helpful. It moves you out of that state of boredom and gets you into a stretch zone where you can start to reach your optimal performance. But where it starts to cause negative effects for us is when the level of pressure gets too high, that you move into strain or even burnout. That's a negative stress, distress, and that's what we want to combat. So as we're thinking about our stress responses and the skills that you can learn, that you can develop to manage this, again, we're not trying to move the level of pressure to zero, because that's not helpful either. Some level of stress is useful. And so what we're looking for is, how can we get a little bit of control over the level of pressure that we're feeling so that we can move stress into that positive stress, that eustress, that where you feel positively excited about it, and feeling like a little bit of nerves. Actually, this level of nerves will help me do well. That feeling of a little bit of butterflies in the stomach can actually be positive. So let's think for a moment about where we experience stress and what it causes in our brain. Some of you may have heard about this concept of the lizard brain versus the wizard brain before. The idea of the lizard brain in your brain stem, this is called the lizard brain because this is some of our earliest brain development, the amygdala, and in your brain stem, when that part of your brain is activated, this is when you often experience that fight or flight response, or we could call it fight, flight, or freeze. When your brain is taken over by worry, by fear, your amygdala is activated, and often you can't access your higher order thinking. Your higher order thinking often is controlled by the prefrontal cortex. We might call that the wizard brain. When the prefrontal cortex is activated, you can access that higher order thinking. This is where creativity lives. This is where problem solving lives. But when you are afraid, you cannot access that level of thinking. And so this fear center, the lizard brain, fight, flight, or freeze, this was a really useful response for when humans were faced with mortal dangers on a daily basis. And so this kind of response keeps us out of physical danger. The problem in our modern lives is that often our brains get to interpreting something that isn't a mortal danger as if it were. And that then we are triggering this fight, flight, or freeze response where we can't think properly anymore. So part of what we'll be talking about is how we can conceive of these techniques to help us deactivate the lizard brain and reactivate the wizard brain so that you can get back to your higher order reasoning skills and access all of your thinking power to be able to solve harder problems on the GMAT. During the exam, your brain is producing a lot of thoughts. And in these days before the exam, your brain is producing a lot of thoughts. What we want to cultivate is the ability to notice all of these different thoughts that your brain is producing, but only believe some of them. Only take some of them. We'll talk about different techniques that you can use to identify these thoughts that are not so helpful so that you keep the space for the ones that are helpful. For that, I'd like to talk about an idea called our sage and our saboteurs. So, building on the idea of the wizard brain, we could call this idea also our sage. Our sage brain, as we were talking about, lives in the middle prefrontal cortex. It motivates you through positive emotions, through empathy, curiosity, creativity, passion, and purpose. And it allows you to access higher order thinking. When your saboteurs take over, they are activating the brainstem and they're motivating you through negative emotions. So they're motivating you through fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, or insecurity. And this is what's activating this fight, flight, or freeze mentality. So when I talk about the idea of saboteurs, we could personify them. And in fact, there are several common characters that may come into your mind to sabotage your GMAT test performance. I'll walk you through several of these characters, several of these saboteurs, and then I'll want to hear if any of these resonate with you, if any of these saboteurs are sometimes present for you. So for each of these saboteurs I'll describe, each one of them is rooted in good intentions. But when we realize that the good intentions have gone too far, we're getting kind of too much of a good thing, this can help us diffuse a negative thinking pattern in order to help move it off of our thinking plate. So the first typical exam saboteur that I see is a character that I might call Doom Time. So Doom Time is the voice in your head that is really worried about the time. And this voice says things to you like, you don't have enough time to do this problem. You don't have enough time to do it well. You're taking too long to read this problem. What time is it? Have you not gotten to an answer yet? Does anybody here have Doom Time? Anybody have some of these thoughts about time management? So yes, indeed. Sometimes it happens early in the test. Sometimes it happens on certain sections of the test. Sometimes it happens to you on different problems. Your ability to really think about the problem that you're doing is compromised when Doom Time shows up on the scene. Doom Time is trying to get your attention. I picture Doom Time as this character who's got a bunch of different clocks and keeps showing them to you. Sometimes Doom Time gets really active and makes you calculate exactly how far behind he or she thinks that you are. Doom Time obviously is coming from a good intention. Originally, they want to help you manage the time, but they take it too far. And so if you can start to recognize that voice, when the voice starts worrying about the time and going too far, if you can start to recognize, hey, I know what that voice is. That's Doom Time. And I don't need you right now, Doom Time. You're not helping with the thoughts that you're giving me. That's our first exam saboteur. Here's a different exam saboteur that sometimes shows up in your practice, especially, might also show up on the real exam. This saboteur I call the discounter. So if you've ever seen an employee in some kind of a retail shop and they have one of these tools that they use to put price tags on things, and like, let's say that a certain group of things are being discounted down to a new price. And so they take this tool and they put a bunch of discounted prices on it. This is how I picture the discounter. The discounter does this idea of marking things down, but it does it with all of your accomplishments. The discounter is the voice that says, let's say you've got 3 questions in a row right, and then you have a 4th question that's incorrect. The discounter is the voice that says, oh, those 3 that were right, they don't count at all. Don't look at that. That doesn't exist. All you need to focus on is the thing that you've done wrong. Does anybody have some version of the discounter that shows up from time to time? All the things that you've done right, don't count, don't count. We just need to focus on the things that you've done wrong. So on the GMAT, this is particularly problematic because, as you all know, the adaptive nature of the exam means that the exam is going to keep ratcheting up the difficulty level of questions until it finds a level where it thinks you only have a 50% chance of getting this question right. So in terms of the psychometrics of how the GMAT is working, it's trying to give you questions that it honestly does not know whether you're going to get right. So that when you give it an answer, then it gains more information about your abilities. But this is a really different experience from many other tests that we've taken in life where we could count on getting a certain number right because we knew they would be easy or medium, and that we could kind of pick and choose which hard ones to do. The discounter is really rough because it doesn't let us pay attention to any of the things that we got right and is really rubbing our faces in what we got wrong. So this is the discounter. The next saboteur that might be showing up in your mind, I call brute force. I find sometimes people who have studied a quantitative discipline earlier in their life might especially have brute force. And brute force is the voice that says, do it the long way. Shortcuts are for the weak. You need to show all of your work, and you need to work harder. You need to work longer. I see brute force show up in two ways. One of them is the way that says, I don't care if you just had a really stressful day at work. You made a commitment that you were going to practice 2 hours of GMAT every night. I don't care if you're in the wrong state of mind. You're going to work 2 hours on the GMAT tonight. Brute force is the one that says you will be guilty if you don't do this. Brute force is also the one that says if you're going to solve that equation, you better do it the proper way that you learned in school. Don't take any shortcuts. That would be for the weak. Don't use the answer choices. Don't use some workaround. Does anybody in the group have some version of brute force that shows up sometimes? So the brute force voice that tells you you have to study after work. So on the one hand, this is coming from a really good place, right? Having a strong work ethic is important and it will help you achieve your goals. But you really need to check in with yourself before you start a study session. Are you in the right state of mind? For example, have you lost all of your patience with yourself or with others because you've used up that whole bucket of patience through the day that you've had so far? Maybe you had stressful coworkers to deal with, or a stressful child that you needed to parent, or a sibling that you needed to take care of, or a really aggravating commute. Who knows what it was? One thing that we can do to push back against brute force is to say, am I in the right state of mind right now? I like that brute force is trying to bring me my work ethic, but if I'm not in the right state of mind right now, let me take some steps, and we'll talk about some pre-study steps that can help make sure that you get in the right mind. Because we want, if you're going to do 2 hours of study time, we want it to be 2 good hours of study time. The idea of studying after work, for many of the students that I work with, we often find that 1 hour before work can be even just as powerful, even just as valid as 2 hours of study after work, especially if the person is dealing with a really challenging, especially emotionally draining kind of a job. Because when you're working on the GMAT, you need to be kind to yourself. You need to have some empathy for yourself. When you make a mistake, you want to make sure not to discount all the good things that you've done. And sometimes that's hard when you're emotionally drained. So we want to watch out for what brute force is saying and find some ways to push back there. Another saboteur that we can experience is one that I call, please like me. So please like me is a question type, or excuse me, is a saboteur type that tries to put your personal validation or find your personal validation from your individual responses on the questions. So please like me is the voice that celebrates hugely when you get a question right. You're like, yes, I'm so awesome. I'm really winning. But then when you get a question wrong, they're like, you're terrible. You're the absolute worst. Why did you think you could ever do the GMAT? So please like me ties your personal validation to the results of every single question. And as a result, you go on this emotional roller coaster depending on whether you got the answer right or wrong. Has anybody in the group experienced please like me coming in your head? Again, this is really challenging on the GMAT because you are going to get some questions wrong, almost certainly, unless you're scoring at the 99th percentile, the 99.7th percentile, and you end up getting all the questions right. Almost certainly you will get some questions wrong, and that's actually okay. as long as they're challenging questions that are really right above the level of your ability. So we have to make sure not to tie our personal feelings of validation to whether an individual question was right or wrong. It's not giving us that feedback. The individual question, right or wrong, is giving us feedback about what do we have left to learn? Where are our areas to improve? And the fifth exam saboteur that I'll tell you about, and there are others, by the way, you all may find as you think about these characters, you may think about another character that you have in your mind. But the fifth one that I'll mention for us today is one that I call test victim. And test victim really is very visually driven. Test victim wants to put in front of you, like the video, the mental footage of every exam experience you've ever had that's ever gone poorly. If you had a negative experience taking an exam during your bachelor's degree, test victim makes you watch it every time you think about the GMAT. If you had a bad experience taking a test when you were in third grade and the teacher made some comment to you about your reading or your math and that stuck with you, test victim is the one who comes in and is like, now let's watch that video of what happened to you in third grade and let's make you watch it every time you're about to do either GMAT practice or a GMAT practice test or the real exam. Does anybody have some version of test victim in their head? This can also be a particular challenge if you've taken a practice test and you did not get results that you liked. Sometimes test victim comes up and wants to show you those results again or make you relive the experience that you had there to say, oh, let's watch that again. So if we think about each of these exam saboteurs, each one of them is coming from good intentions, right? Test victim initially probably wants you to learn from past mistakes. Please like me wants to find some way to motivate you to succeed. Brute force doesn't want you to take the easy way out, but each of them take it to an extreme. And so if you can hear those voices and you can recognize that as a saboteur in your head, a saboteur that is changing the conversation away from where you want it to be, which is focusing on the question and using your brain to work on the question, and that saboteur is hijacking your brain in a way and making the conversation what they want it to be. If you can, sometimes it's really helpful to create a visual. So if you really relate to doom time, take a moment and create some kind of a visual in your head for what do you think this character looks like? So that then when you hear them show up in your head, you immediately recognize who it is. And you say, ha ha, I was expecting you, doom time. I know that you always show up on right about question 17 of the quant. Or maybe you always show up even right before I start the verbal because I always run out of time on the reading comprehension, for example. So when you anticipate that that saboteur is coming, that makes it easier for you to diffuse them and to say, I hear you, I know who that is, but I don't need your help right now. I'm going to move you to the side. Each of these saboteurs is giving us a little bit of pain, is giving us a warning sign. And so just like a physical pain, physical warning sign, that initial sense that we get of, oh no, that sense of dread or, oh, that's an uncomfortable feeling, that's a warning to us. It's actually useful. So we're not trying to eliminate doom time altogether from ever existing, but we are trying to recognize as soon as he shows up or as she shows up, we want to intercept him or her. So what we're thinking about here is we want to be able to recognize these saboteurs so that we can intercept them. Then we will take some steps to engage your sage brain. So how we can switch from that fight or flight mode that's driven by fear and anxiety. Take some steps that we'll talk about to engage your sage brain so that then you can move forward with laser focused action and tackle the question the way that you know you can and the way that you want to. So let's think about some strategies that you can use during your study sessions, during your prep. And some of these you can also use during the real exam as well. One of my top suggestions to you, it's so portable, especially for folks who have an exam coming up in 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks. But even for those of you who've got a longer timeline, let's think about some breathing exercises. I will be honest with you. For a long, long time in life, I was really annoyed when people suggested breathing as a way of managing stress. I thought, if it were that easy, everybody would do it. I felt like when people suggested doing deep breathing, it was a way of saying your concerns aren't valid. But the more that I did research, especially once I got keen on understanding high performance psychology and high performance mindset, I realized breathing is a scientifically proven, extremely powerful tool to diffuse those saboteurs, diffuse lizard brain, and give us the ability to access our higher order thinking powers. So I want to suggest 2 specific breathing exercises for you. There are many different ones that you can find online, and I encourage you to try out different ones and see what you like. But there are 2 of them that I want to talk about right now. So these, you'll see that they have numbers in their descriptions, and the numbers refer to the counts that you will use for different steps of the breath. So the first one, and we'll do this together so you can see how it feels. We'll try a 4-7-8 breath for calm. And so 4 refers to we will breathe in for a count of 4, we'll hold it for a count of 7, and we'll breathe out for a count of 8. When you breathe in, ideally breathe in through your nose. That has more brain benefits for you. And when you breathe out, you can breathe out through your mouth. So let's try a 4-7-8 breath for calm. This is especially helpful if you are feeling those saboteurs present, if you are feeling that anxiety. So let's breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and now out. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a long out breath, isn't it? That's by design. That longer out breath can help lower your blood pressure, lower your heart rate. 4-7-8 breath is also good, for example, if you're trying to get to sleep the night before the exam or 2 nights before the exam. It's also good to do that continuously. That can often bring you down into a much more relaxed state. So I offer that to you as a great, super portable resource. You can do it during studying. You can do it during a practice test. You can do it during the real exam. If you find, on the other hand, that what you need is actually to focus more, it's not so much that you're anxious, but that you want to get a better sense of focus, you could try what's called a box breath. The idea of the box breath is that we're going to breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold it out for 4. So let's try that. We breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4, hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm moving my hand here to show the box. You could do that if you're alone, but otherwise you can envision the box, and this also gives your mind a nice other thing to do. Have a few rounds of box breathing, and that this can help increase your level of focus. Another technique that is super portable, and that of course you can try many different versions of, are using some portable mindful meditation exercises. So many different mindfulness exercises are based on increasing our perception of the here and now, increasing our perception of our senses. If you think about what those saboteurs are telling you, they're very often talking to you about worrying about the future, like what will happen if you don't get the GMAT score that you want. That's a very common way of sabotaging us into drawing our attention toward the future, or making you worry about the past. So like test victim, making you focus on the things that have gone badly in the past, or reminding you of all the questions you've gotten wrong in the past. You can't do GMAT questions when your attention is on the future or when it's on the past. You can do GMAT questions when your attention is right here, right now, in the present. And so to help you do that, you can leverage some mindful meditation exercises. One version that you can do is to focus on a single sense and describe to yourself everything that you notice. Hearing is an interesting one. So if right now you take a moment and listen for the furthest away thing that you can hear. Maybe and I think we're back. I think we're back. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can get our. Okay. I think we can still see the screen, so we'll keep going. Sorry about that. It looked like we had a little connection interrupted. So maybe that gave you a chance to see what you could hear that was close to you, because then you didn't have the sound of my voice for that moment. So you can practice focusing on different senses and seeing what you notice. Another opportunity for mindfulness is to get a little bit more physical. And so this can help when you're experiencing some more extreme anxiety. Sometimes just diverting your focus to a different place isn't enough to get you out of that fight or flight mindset. And then what can work is a tense and release exercise. So let's try one of those for a second. You choose a muscle group to tense up. For our purposes, let's try your hands and your arms. So tense those hands and arms. We'll tense them up for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax them. If you want to do more of those, you can choose different muscle groups and use those as well. So you can tense up your feet and tense up your toes and relax them. If you're sitting down, you can tense up your butt muscles, your gluteus, your hamstrings as well. That's a huge muscle group. If you tense that up and let that go, that can give you a big feeling of release. So if you're experiencing some anxiety that feels stronger and that some of these other techniques aren't getting it for you, try out a tense and release. See if that helps as well. Another technique that you can use in your preparation time, and this is something that I like to encourage my candidates to do toward the beginning of their prep as well, is to curate your mental visuals. So what are the pictures that you are carrying around in your mind about the exam? If you have a mental visual that represents the exam as some insurmountable mountain or some negative gate that you have to go through that you feel like you don't have the keys to open, pay attention to what are those visuals that you're carrying around in your mind. A technique that can be really powerful that many athletes use is to curate those visuals. So maybe make a gallery of different moments of pride that you have experienced. So think about some different events in your life where you have been proud, either of your effort or of your accomplishment. Could be something academic, doesn't have to be. It could be something in the arts or in sports, or something personal, like maybe you were proud of a home improvement project that you did. Take some time and curate maybe 4 or 5 images, and like you can really go find these images. Go find images that represent those things you're thinking about, that represent times when you were proud of your effort. And then find an image that can represent the GMAT, that the GMAT will be one of these next events where you can be proud of the work that you did, proud of the progress that you made, proud of what you accomplished. Make that thing your desktop background. Or if you have a workspace where you can put something on the wall, put that right there so that you can see the visuals, that you can represent the GMAT as this is the next thing that I'm going to be proud of myself about. Another technique that many high-level performers use is to spend some time in really focused daydreaming. Direct a mental movie of the test going well. And what I mean by going well is not like going flawlessly, that suddenly all the things are really easy. No, direct a mental movie where you overcome the challenges that you foresee might occur. Like if you foresee that you're going to take the test in the testing center, and you foresee that maybe you might get annoyed when someone comes and sits down next to you to start their exam and you're halfway through your exam. If you know that kind of thing might annoy you, put it in your mental movie and have a focused daydream about how you will respond, how you will overcome it. If you're worried about running out of time, include that in your mental movie with a positive outcome. Think about how you will handle that, how you will show your flexibility in the moment, and really envision yourself handling it. Research shows that if you envision something often enough, you can actually start to encode some of the patterns as if that were a real memory. If you envision something often enough, you can trick your brain into thinking that it has truly happened. And so this is a positive and a negative, right? Because you can take control of this and envision how you want it to go. But if you let something like test victim keep showing you videos of either negative experiences that you have had with exams or predicting that it will go badly, then your brain will think that that's already happened as well. So take control of your mental visuals and use that strategically. Another idea here is to get the thoughts on paper. So this can be especially helpful if, let's say, you're coming to study after a long day of work and you've still got a million thoughts running around in your head about the things that you need to take care of at work, maybe projects that you're responsible for, clients that you're responsible for. If you sit down to study for the GMAT and your mental workspace is not clear, take a moment to get it clear. Brain dump all that stuff onto paper. I have worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, for example, who are preparing for the GMAT while they are simultaneously building their own business. I know they've got millions of to-dos on their mind, and sometimes things will spark different ideas. Get it down on paper. I swear this sometimes helps your brain feel like, she's listening to me. She wrote it down, and then your brain will stop bothering you about it. So if you find that your mental desk is quite cluttered, write that stuff down before you start practicing. And then you can also take that same paper and set some intentions for your daily practice. What do you want to accomplish with the time for the practice? For example, I want to get better at handling word problems that deal with percentages. I'm not trying to immediately achieve my goal score today, but I do have this specific intention. I can go ahead and write it down before I get started. So these are some strategies that you can use during your prep. When it comes to actually handling the exam, and so here I'm thinking about handling practice sessions where you're timing yourself, handling practice exams, and handling the real exam, here are some strategies that I would share with you. One of our most powerful ways to control what's going on in our mind is to pay attention to how we're talking to ourselves. Pay attention to your self-talk and see if you can train that self-talk to be an effective coach for you. The coach that you would be to someone else, the coach that you wish you had in your ear, talking to you. I have a little comic for us to look at, and it uses the game of baseball as a metaphor. And so here we can see different examples of our baseball player engaging in some positive self-talk before the game, or some negative self-talk before the game, or some instructional self-talk during the game. So you can see in the positive self-talk example, he says, today's going to be a great game. I'm excited to be out here today. This is also something that you can do for yourself before you start a practice session, before you start a practice task, before you start the real test. Speak to yourself with some positive self-talk. You know that if you speak to yourself in a negative way, oh man, I really don't feel well today. I know I'm going to play like trash. I just want to go home. Has anybody ever said that when they showed up for an actual exam, maybe in university or in your studies? I've known that feeling. It can be hard to overcome. So if you notice that you're speaking to yourself with negative self-talk, you don't need to beat yourself up about it, but you could recognize that as a saboteur. You could call that person bad coach or not so helpful coach. And that's someone you're like, you know what, not so helpful coach, why don't you go sit down and stop telling the future like that? I'm going to speak to myself in a more positive way. The last part of this comic is showing us actually something different. If you look at what the player is doing, he's doing this move in baseball called sliding. And so he's not saying to himself, "Oh, I hope I do the slide right," or "Oh, I hope I get there in time." He's not predicting the outcome. He is actually giving himself instructions about exactly how to do it. He says, keep your hands up and one leg under the other when sliding. It's like the way that his coach probably told him to do it, or if he was explaining it to someone else, how he would tell them to do it. This instructional self-talk is a great place for you to live during the GMAT, during practice sessions, during practice exams, and during the real exam. Tell yourself what to do. In your mind's eye or mind's ear, walk yourself through the steps. I often find when I'm talking with students in private coaching sessions, when they explain a problem to me, sometimes they say, well, wait a second, now that I explained it to you, it seems really clear, because they took me through the steps. They talked me through what needed to happen. That does help make it clear for you, and that is something you can do for yourself in the test. It isn't like you need to be some sort of a sponge that just soaks up the problem and then squeezes out the answer. Talk yourself through the steps that need to happen. This is a great way to keep your focus where it needs to be and to set yourself up for success. So this is an example of instructional talk in the moment. Another thing in the moment that you can handle during your timed practice sessions, as well as in the real exam, pay attention to what you are saying to yourself about the time. Many of us have some version of doom time hanging around during the exam, saying things like, you don't have enough time to think about this. You don't have enough time to do this well. That's not helpful. Decide on a different mantra that you want to say to yourself. Some students of mine have liked mantras like these. The time is a resource for me to use. So we're all managers, or we aspire to be managers or leaders. We will have to make choices about scarce resources. Time is a scarce resource in the GMAT, but it is a resource that we can use. Time is a resource for me to use. I will use that time to get points, to get questions correct. Not every single one, but as many as I can with this time that I have. Or another mantra that some students have really liked, I want to use the time to show what I know and what I can do. I'm going to use the time to show what I know and what I can do. If you don't like what you were saying to yourself about time during the exam, say something different. Write that thing down several times so that then you can remember it. Say it to yourself before a practice exam. Put it in your mental video and say it to yourself during the real exam. When you notice that your focus is lacking, invest in a mini break and do that even during the real exam. So if you realize that your focus is elsewhere, that you've lost your concentration, that you're not thinking about the problems correctly, it would be far better to invest 20 seconds in a little break to help you get that focus back so that then you can handle the next questions much more effectively. A mini break could be breathing exercises, like we talked about. A mini break could be a sensory focus, like listening for what's far, listening for what's near. It could be doing a tense and relax. Or it could be taking a little mental vacation to a positive memory. Studies have shown that thinking about positive or even funny memories from the past can increase performance on math exams. I don't have any evidence about whether it helps with something like reading comprehension, but it certainly could lift up your mood. So if you find that your focus is not where it needs to be, make that executive decision to invest in a small mini break so that you can get your focus and concentration to a much more effective level. And finally, a very effective strategy is to rehearse your resilience. Anticipate what could bother you during the exam and practice responding to that during a practice exam. I had a candidate that I worked with a few months ago who was really underperforming on practice tests. And I knew that he had prepared exceptionally well because his technical knowledge was outstanding. But on some of his practice tests, and crucially, when he went to sit for the real exam, he underperformed dramatically by more than 100 points. And so we worked through some sessions just on thinking about what it was that he was most concerned about that would bother him or throw him off during the exam. And we worked on ways to simulate that during practice exams. So if he thought that he would be bothered by someone else coming in during the exam, we had his friends come simulate that. So he's taking a practice exam at home under time conditions. We had his friends come in the door and bother him. Things that normally you wouldn't want to happen, but he knew that kind of thing would really bother him during the real exam. So he practiced responding to it during these practice exams. If you take your practice exams like they are a real rehearsal and you rehearse some of the things that could go wrong, practice responding effectively, this can really convince you of your ability to respond to anything that might happen and convince you that you are prepared to show what you know. So these are some of my strategies for you for what I would call game time. But again, any of these strategies, we can't just wait to do them at the exam. We want to practice them in advance so that then when the exam comes, you have demonstrated to yourself your ability to use these strategies to be able to gain some more control over the situation. Okay, finally, I want to share with you some ways of thinking about after the exam. You might say, after the exam, who cares? It's over. But perhaps it's not over, right? Most candidates will take the exam twice. Worldwide, that's the average. I've worked with many candidates who've taken it more than that. Whenever you take the exam, or we could think about this after a practice exam, you could think about the sage perspective, which is that every situation represents a gift or opportunity. And so, however the exam went, you could think about what gift or opportunity is this presenting to me? Does it present me with the gift of knowledge? Did I learn some specific things about myself, about how to handle this? Did it present me with the gift of power? Did it help me get stronger? Or did it present me with the gift of inspiration? Perhaps it's giving you new motivation for the future. So we can think about even after a practice exam, even after a real exam, you still have the opportunity to manage your mindset by looking at this as a gift or opportunity, regardless of how it went. And think about what does it present you with for the future. So now what I want to hear is in the chat, of these different things we've talked about, which strategies do you want to try maybe in the next week? Or maybe still today. Can pick, I'd say pick at least two. Which strategies would you like to try in the next week? You want to try breathing exercise? Maybe one or more of the mindfulness meditation techniques? Do you want to work on your mental visuals? Would you like to try getting your thoughts on paper if you know that your mind is cluttered when you sit down to practice or when you sit down for a practice test? You're going to practice some instructional self-talk, time management mantras, some mindfulness breaks during the exam, rehearsing your resilience, and maybe finding the gift or opportunity afterward. Okay, so I see breathing is coming up for a number of people, instructional self-talk, mental visuals resonates with some folks, and rehearsing that resilience. Excellent, excellent. The last couple things I'll share with you, and then I will stay on definitely for 10 minutes after the hour because I promised to have some time for Q&A. So just to share a thought here that if we want to make a change, insight is usually only 20% of that. So today we're getting some, hopefully, insight into ways to make a change. But what we really want in order to make that lasting positive change is you need to build mental muscle. So we need to do the reps. We need to do the repetitions of whichever these techniques are that you've decided you want to try. Don't just try it once. Do some reps so that you can build the mental muscle so that it is accessible to you. And if there is a way that I can be helpful to you in your process, you've got a code here for 15% off any packages with me that you would book before February 15th. The QR code would take you to my profile on Leland, and I'd be happy to talk with you during an intro call about what that might look like for you. But so that's my little advertisement part of this. But now I would love to open it up to your questions. And as I mentioned, I will stay on until 10 after the hour to answer questions. So feel free for questions. You can either write them in the chat, or if you would rather pose the question by speaking, just raise your hand and then I'll call on you. Raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you and then you can unmute. Nishan, I like your comment too, that you have a breathing exercise and meditation practice already, but adding instructional self-talk and time management mantras could be useful. Sounds good. I'm glad to hear it. I will stay here for a bit for you if you're formulating a question in the chat, because I am indeed happy to answer them.
Hey Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Hi. My question, I guess, is maybe tangential to the topics we went over today, but my question is more about fatigue during the exam. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like the usage of like your optional break is really important. Um, what is your recommendation for people who take the test who suffer from fatigue by the time they reach the third section? What are your tips or just general advice for taking the exam and trying to keep an optimal level of mental energy throughout the test?
Yes, it's a great question, and it's still totally related to our mindset and something that's even goes beyond our actual knowledge, but that's affecting our performance. So totally on topic, I would say, as a question, because this definitely affects us. So a few things I would say is I totally recommend taking the optional break and using that break as strategically as you possibly can. During the optional break, I highly suggest drinking water. Your brain needs water. It is hugely important. I would also experiment with, is it useful for you to drink something else? Like, is it useful for you to drink caffeine during the break? That depends on the person. I don't make a global recommendation on that. I think it's useful to experiment with that. Is it useful for you to eat sugar? Some people really like to eat, for example, a sugary thing with the protein thing, like, for example, a chocolatey protein bar or chocolate and nuts, like a kind of trail mix sort of thing. For some people, it's better to eat a banana. I highly suggest, though, that you consume some kind of nutrition during the break. I mean, like, glucose is brain food, but I don't necessarily suggest just like pile on a whole bunch of chocolate unless that's what you do and you know it works for you. So paying attention to water, paying attention to nutrition during the break, that can help counteract fatigue. I would also think about during the break, move your body. do some stretches, like stretch up, stretch down, stretch back, like do some of that. I don't care how weird people in the testing center think you are. It doesn't matter. It's your test, not theirs. Or if you're at home, even better, do your thing. I would think about that during the break. So those things could be helpful. They could give you some new energy. Another thing that you could think about is if you are experiencing that kind of slump at that time, that suggests to me that there could be an opportunity also with your own training to train for that endurance. So in a way that's very similar maybe to how marathon runners train, you don't have to run the marathon every time, but that if you start to build in some longer practice sessions that are at a similar level of intensity. So some people may say, yeah, I have a 2-hour practice session, but it's nowhere near the intensity of the GMAT. Like I have a 2-hour practice session and I do a couple questions and then I review. It's not the same as I'm doing practice questions with the timer on for that whole 2 hours. So this could be another way to improve your endurance and combat fatigue, is have increasingly longer practice sessions where you're trying to build up that mental muscle and that mental endurance to go that far. I would also think about, because the exam is adaptive at the question level, but also at the section level. By that, I mean your performance on the first section does inform the difficulty level of your second section, does inform the difficulty level of your third section. If you put your strongest ones first, which you should, putting the strongest ones first, it is setting you up to have hopefully a higher difficulty level version of the third, which might be your weakest link, but that's actually good for you because at least you're starting from a higher place. But that also suggests that you need to train that way, if that makes sense. So train with those sections in that order, but you could also during your training experiment with what happens if I switch the order of section 2 and section 3. Does that actually give me a better result overall? Does any of that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Yeah.
Okay, great question. Right on. Thank you. Other questions? You can pose a question in the chat. You can pose a question live. I'm open to it. I'm also open to, if you have ideas for other sessions that you would like to see, other free events that you would like to see on Leland, GMAT related or MBA or Master in Business application related too, I'm also open to those suggestions as well. So I love presenting this session, but I'm also open to other topics that candidates find helpful. So if you want to throw it in the chat, or also my chat is open to you on Leland as well. If you have some thoughts in the coming days, boy, I would really love it if you do a webinar on this, please feel free. I'd be very happy to get that feedback. Because that's part of what makes it fun for me, is feeling like we can present content that addresses people's needs. Yes, Nishant.
Yeah, hi. I think your sessions such as this would be really helpful in the MBA bootcamp if you could squeeze that in. Yeah, in one
Oh,
of those
cool.
days. Yeah, they teach
Okay,
us
that's cool.
about
Thank you.
essays, LORs, everything, interview, but such things are really necessary, I think. Yeah, to
Okay,
have
that's
a
really helpful. Thank you. I can pass it on.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, as you're mentioning it too, because as we think about, I have some candidates that I work with on interview prep, for example, and some of these same kinds of techniques, obviously the interview is not exactly the same as the GMAT, but in terms of getting yourself in a mental state where you feel like you can demonstrate part of what's compelling about your background or what you could bring to the program, we could use some of these same kinds of techniques as well. So that could indeed be interesting to think about. Thank you.
Exactly. And thank you for the session. It was really, really helpful. I think
Oh,
it was
great.
the
I'm so
best.
glad.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'll go ahead and close the session, but thank you so much and wishing you a great rest of your day or evening. Bye-bye.